I think people ultimately want a little bit more ownership in what's happening in their nation and what's happening in their community, what's happening in their neighborhood. A little more buy-in from their neighbors, a little bit more comfort in who's making decisions. So I think a lot of independence movements are investing in not just understanding the culture of the place they're in, but having a stronger influence on direct democracy or encouraging like more direct democracy policies or practices.
Welcome to Pacific Time, the podcast where we ask the big what if questions about the future of the West Coast, its challenges, its opportunities, and the potential for independence. I'm your host, Greg Amrofell. We humans embrace maps and boundaries to help us make sense of vast land masses. We color between the lines by giving names to these territories, whether they are countries, states, counties, or cities. And around these names, we build identities, creating shorthand for who we are, what we share, and what we believe. Here's the thing. What if we've been drawing these maps in the wrong way for centuries? What if our current maps have more to do with political decisions made at distant times in faraway capitals than with what exists right around us in nature? What if new maps centered on the environment also recognized how people congregate and interact? If this approach to making sense of space seems intuitive, yes, natural, you're going to love the idea of bioregionalism. Bioregionalism helps explain why the West Coast stands apart from the rest of the U.S., because of our orientation to the Pacific and because major mountain ranges and deserts separate us from places east. Bioregionalism may also challenge whether the West Coast can function as a unified whole. I've certainly noticed that the forested Northwest where I live now produces a different culture and mentality than what I found growing up in the warm, arid regions spanning from Central to Southern California. As we continue to explore West Coast independence, we're diving into bioregionalism. Our guest today, Yogi Uriah, is a leader in the Cascadia Department of Bioregion, a nonprofit working to link people who share a common landscape and climate in the Northwest. The group argues that Cascadia is a region defined by interconnected watersheds all the way up from the Alaska Panhandle down through British Columbia to the redwood forests of Northern California, and ranging from the Pacific east to parts of Montana and Oregon. Note that the concept of Cascadia puts aside national and state boundaries. This is what bioregionalism is about. Yogi, a native of Atlanta, has lived in Seattle for over 10 years. He is the kind of grassroots organizer at the heart of many social movements, full of knowledge and wisdom. He offers earnest warmth to spare for people who are curious about his movement. As he'll explain, Yogi's working on projects that bring people in Cascadia back to the land and celebrate the stewardship of indigenous people going back centuries. Through a shared ecosystem, culture and symbols have emerged that, Yogi says, run stronger than political boundaries set by Washington, D.C. Yogi dove in by defining Cascadia and the bioregion movement.
The Cascadia bioregion is defined by the watersheds that encompasses portions of Montana, Idaho, Utah, almost all of the Alaskan Panhandle, what we speak to as British Columbia, all of the state of Washington, large portions of Western and Central Oregon, and a small portion of Northern California, and encompasses about 530,000 square miles of land, and is an endonym to describe the region as opposed to names like the Pacific Northwest, which describes the region in relation to Washington, D.C. The Cascadia bioregion is defined by more natural boundaries as opposed to political boundaries. So did that answer your question?
It does. Although go further. I mean, I think you're hinting at kind of natural boundaries, but why not go further south in California or further north into Canada or even east?
Yeah, I just believe bioregionalism kind of connects to the idea that we're people, right? But there's always going to be cultural differences based on the land and how we connect with the land specifically. So, what's going to be possible to produce from this region here based on those environmental factors is going to be very different than what people are capable of producing in California. And as a result, the culture of those people is going to very dramatically in some cases. So I think it makes sense to have some sort of boundaries of land and of association with the land, just like it makes sense for boundaries with dealing with people in your general life. You have to set up those boundaries so people kind of understand where they stand and can relate to each other based off of that. So love my Californians, but I think they're ultimately different than, say somebody who lives in Vancouver, whereas somebody who lives in Vancouver might relate a little bit better to somebody that lives in Portland, Oregon.
All right. So I think I'm getting a sense of how you define the Cascadia bioregion. But by comparison, could you describe other bioregions that might help us understand the concept a little better?
Of course, I think the Piedmont bioregion is an excellent example that encompasses northern Georgia, all of South Carolina, much of North Carolina, east of the Appalachian Mountains. So there's like a kind of clay material that supplements dirt there. It creates the circumstances around what kind of foods they grow, like pecans and things of that nature. So the cuisine is a little bit closer correlated. It has some deep South roots as well culturally with what sort of policies the people had there. The ethnic makeup of that area is very, very comparable. It has very hot summers, but somewhat mountainous, although not extremely mountainous. People aren't, used to skiing or snowboarding in that region, so the mountains are there, right? But the cultural connectivity to hiking isn't as similar in the Piedmont bioregion. So I think that's an example of one I would speak to. The Ozarks in Arkansas is another smaller bioregion that we kind of look to because of the extensive caves there and how the caves interact with, the individuals that live in that particular bioregion. I think the, California bioregion, which would encompass Baja California, as well as, up to Weed, California, where Cascadia's boundaries kind of end. So that would be, inclusive of San Francisco, inclusive of Reno, Nevada, inclusive of, some of the more arid desert regions of the Inland Empire and Southern California and Baja California, but also has beaches that are very popular and very desirable by, a multitude of individuals. People move there for those beaches, but you also have to kind of manipulate that environment in a way that makes it tenable to produce, much of the food that a lot of us in the United States are dependent upon. So does that answer your question for a few different bioregions?
It does. So what I'm hearing is there are kind of natural characteristics that are shared and define a region or shape, kind of set its boundaries. And those natural characteristics then trickle into lots of other aspects of life there, including the culture of the people that live in a particular place.
Exactly. Otherwise, we're just kind of describing biomes, right? I think what makes it a bioregion is that social element, is that cultural element, like these, natural existing things that have kind of almost nothing to do with us, a little to do with us because humans do change and manipulate the environment. But like, how do these natural elements influence the way people behave and interact with each other ultimately?
Well, and that's great because, obviously the premise of Pacific Time is an exploration of West Coast independence. Cascadia and this bioregion is one effort that I think has a political element to it. So could you comment on the overlay of politics as it relates to this bioregion and bioregionalism generally?
The movement has advanced so much. I remember speaking with a lot of Cal exit individuals during Trump's running of presidency in 2020. And, we realized almost instantly how similar we are, but how different we are as people. There was just like a different prioritization on specific things. I think we're both health conscious people in what's known as the Pacific Northwest, what I call Cascadia. But the way people go about health culture is dramatically different. The way people, address hiking, for instance, is so different as a result of, like I said, the landscape. So I think where we're aligned is how essential our advocacy for different social groups in these regions reflects upon our industries in a way that isn't reflected on the East Coast. So I think that's something we're kind of united on. I mean, it's no secret that a lot of the most important technological hubs are going to be based in this bioregion, whether it is California or Washington. So the kind of dependency the rest of the United States has on those companies does impact the culture and how we would move forward as a bioregion. I think it would be intellectually lazy to not consider the ramifications of other countries and other bioregions and the products we use and the products we design specifically in California or Washington. You know, the device I'm using now is dependent upon one of those companies, but also, you know, the labor of people in different places. You know, we've all seen the data that suggests that if California was its own sovereign state, it would be, you know, the eighth largest in GDP, right? Gross domestic product, which is
maybe as big as the fifth.
Maybe as big as the fifth. Wow.
Yep.
Okay. I think, okay, that's mind blowing. But I think a lot of us, at least in recent years, have started to really analyze and assess how valid GDP is for the overall, you know, well-being of a nation anyway. You know, is that always going to quantify to a positive ratio of quality of life? I think some would suggest no for one. So that's even suggesting, like, yes, California by itself, if they were a sovereign state and had independence, would people be better off? And then you're suggesting, hey, they're still a part of a country where they're at a lower ranking system, so to speak, right? So how would that impact independence? And what would it look like for people to take hold and take a little bit more agency in their day-to-day life? I think that's where people are missing. And that's why people want independence. That's why these independence movements are so valid and powerful and, you know, relevant to our social circumstances today. I think people ultimately want a little bit more ownership in what's happening in their nation and what's happening in their community, what's happening in their neighborhood. You know, a little more buy-in from their neighbors, a little bit more comfort in who's making decisions. So I think a lot of independence movements are encouraging or investing in not just understanding the culture of the place they're in, but having a stronger influence on direct democracy or encouraging like more direct democracy policies or practices.
So let's bring it back to this bioregion, to Cascadia.
Yeah, totally.
You know, I'm interested, Yogi, in your perspective, but also kind of your perspective for the movement. Are folks after Cascadian independence, or is it something different?
Well, I think people at this point, and when you say, you know, people, I like to define what that means. You know, I put it kind of in three different categories. People that are actively organizing within the bioregional movement, people that have taken interest in learning about what bioregionalism is, and then who you would consider maybe as the general public. I think the answer for the general public would, of course, be no, right? I don't think there's any person generally who's dedicating that amount of time to gain an independence from the United States and Canada. Again, other just general stats. Most people just dedicate a small fraction of their time to anything political anyway. Having said that, I find a lot of people who are invested, who are shaping the narratives, who are doing the work behind bioregionalism, are of course invested in having independence from the United States and making this a actual vehicle for change in how somebody can live and what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be a citizen of a nation. So yeah, I think independence is what the ultimate goal would be.
But I think I hear you drawing an important distinction, and it's subtle, but you may be saying, hey, independence as a sovereign nation may be beside the point. The point is how we behave and how we think about ourselves. And you're saying one organizing principle for a group of people to act as a collective, as a society, is through the lens of being in the same bioregion. Is that right?
To a degree, I think since most people who are doing bioregional based work are invested in independence, I think there has to be a conscious consideration of the general public's ability to carry that out. And so what I'm getting at is, I don't think today, if a vote were to occur to separate from the rest of the United States and Canada, I don't think people would have the necessary tools to be self-sustaining or live a comparable or ideally better quality of life than they did under the current political regime that we're in now. So I think it's not just about giving people the tools to be independent, but creating a framework of rooted in strong sustainability, that could exist, that could consider the practices of the people that were here before us, right? They've been bringing in the indigenous people who stewarded this land for, centuries, what they think this land should look like in 100 years, right? It would have to bring in so many different factions to consider, hey, this is what would be an equitable and sustainable independence movement.
Got it. There's a bunch in what you're saying that I want to come back to, but I want to do a little bit more excavation of the movement. First of all, could you describe the organization that you're part of and its role within Cascadia? And then could you describe other groups that are working inside of the bioregion?
Totally. I got my work working with a group called Cascadia Now. Bioregioning is our new word for any sort of work related to advocating for the bioregion of Cascadia. Cascadia Now used to, volunteer, do a lot of direct action and attempt to support politicians who were rooted in bioregionalism. And now they work kind of as a fiscal sponsorship group. So if they, find a initiative of some sort that aligns with their values, they'll, create some sort of package deal to sponsor the work that they do. The Department of Bioregion operates a little bit differently from this standpoint. We want to activate those who have ideas and support the ideas they have directly. So we have a lot of programs to encourage people to do work that aligns with our values if they haven't already begun to do similar work. So a lot of that's why I've mentioned food so much. A lot of the direct action work the Department of Bioregion has done most recently has involved encouraging people to do a little bit more guerrilla gardening and initiate pea patch work on their own, like have more food sovereignty, and then support specific bills that people have been kind of talking about as members of ours. We want to be a little bit more cognizant of what our members desire from an organization, because we are ultimately still a social group. And, we have kind of polls every year or annually to dictate or determine what work or project will be our general focus this year. Being that we've facilitated a lot of a mutual aid right now that's engaged with kind of having climate anxiety circles and, supporting those who are anxious about the climate changes, as well as suggesting ideas or having kind of a think tank for how people can be a little bit more climate minded in how they live their life.
So it sounds like climate sustainability are big themes of what the Department of the Bioregion, the group you're part of, is really working on.
Well, we're working on as well. Like, I think everybody is of the belief that this will be kind of a haven for the nation post climate change, making sure we have stronger facilities to provide resilience for those who are without or who are most vulnerable. We want to be supportive to the peoples here that are going to be most negatively impacted by climate change.
Could we do a quick gallop through the history of the Cascadia movement? What to you have been the major milestones of the whole discussion of Cascadia and of bioregionalism in this part of the country?
I think there's about three sort of events that occurred in the late 70s to early to mid 80s. I think Ecotopia is a book that we all kind of have read. I think that's like the essential book for the Cascadia movement, which, kind of suggests this new methodology for understanding our regions. And I think like the most basic example of regions that the census uses, we as a nation, we only have 4 regions: the West, the Southwest, the Southeast, Northeast, right? And that's a really basic understanding of things. But I'm sorry, it's West, Midwest, Southeast, Northeast. Apologies. So 4 regions that the census uses. But I think this book is the first one that kind of suggests, hey, it needs to be based on, population cores and how people are tending to migrate themselves. And it gives a alternate view of what this particular region that we understand as Cascadia views. So I think Ecotopia helps with that a lot. I think Doug McCloskey's the McCloskey map, which is the most general accepted boundaries for Cascadia, he creates that in the 80s as well. I think that's a key linchpin as well. And then the Bioregional Congress in 1986, where a bunch of different architects, thought leaders converge at Evergreen State College to kind of define what bioregioning is. That was a major linchpin in the Cascadia movement as a whole. And then, the flag is created by Alexander Berthe a little bit soon after that. And now we have like a symbol to attach ourselves to, with the Douglas fir being our symbol, being that it's the most prevalent tree in the region, having that, tree associated with us, having national colors being the green, white, and blue, I think kind of is the beginning of Cascadia. And then moving forward, I think, the 90s in Seattle and Portland they become more corporate locations over time. And, I think there was a strong desire with grunge, for people to have some sort of connective tissue to something that wasn't just about consume, 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 consume. And I think our arts and media have reflected this desire to remain connected to, the overall Cascadia idea, the fact that this region is thought to be the most far out or separated from, normal culture or whatever the normal person is. And I think the Cascadia movement even goes so far back to the lawless area, if you will, of what Oregon Territory was for so long, before Oregon and Washington become states, so it's really the last region, I think, of the world to be impacted by globalization. It gets brought under the Union as we know it relatively late in the game and compared to like Florida and other areas, so I know I went off the rails a little bit, but did I answer your question?
You absolutely did. Those are all really good milestones. Ecotopia, the McCloskey map, and this Evergreen State College kind of bioregioning discussion, punctuated by the creation of symbols like the flag. And by the way, I mean, my familiarity with the idea of Cascadia probably owes most to the fact that I'm a soccer fan and I follow the Seattle Sounders. And the Seattle Sounders, Vancouver Whitecaps, and Portland Timbers fight it out every year for what's called the Cascadia Cup. And you see the Doug fir flags flying in all parts of the stadium, regardless of who you're supporting. So that's interesting. But then from a corporate perspective, I hear you. I mean, what drew me up to Seattle was a job at Microsoft, and I at big companies like Amazon and Nike and others being up here, I think are kind of have drawn people to the region, and I know leaders at those companies, along with some government officials, have talked about the Cascadia corridor and talk about cross-border projects like putting in high-speed rail between Portland and Vancouver. That's another way that it comes up for me. Does that resonate? Are there other big things that kind of bring Cascadia and the ideas of the bioregion to the public?
I think the Cascadia Conference specifically as well with the Urban Land Institute is a big one because it talks a lot about landscaping and kind of, we almost had what's called a Manhattanization of Seattle, but basically companies like Microsoft, companies like Amazon being able to buy so many buildings and how they've dealt with working with ownership of buildings in general. I think that's a big part of the whole Portland, Washington, Seattle thing specifically. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with your views with soccer. I think specifically, right, that like cultural connective tissue that we all have, because I've played more soccer and viewed more soccer here than anywhere else I've lived, and I didn't really expect that as a whole. But yeah, I think you addressed a lot of the primary cultural connective tissues, and I'm super excited for Cascadia high speed rail. I think that would be an absolute game changer, but there's definitely some barriers there. But could you imagine, being able to live in Portland and have your job in Vancouver and just like commute there every day? Like that would be incredible.
It would be. So let's talk about the Cascadia movement. What's putting wind in its sails right now?
Well, as I've kind of implied, I think our present administration brings up a lot of challenges. And, I think when it started, we had a very conservative leadership arm in the government as a whole. And I think the ultra conservative executive leadership has always kind of pushed us to find other ways to connect with each other. because, the people that agree with bioregionalism would have to view overtly capitalistic policies as abusive to the human experience. So I think that's where we stand now, is how can we connect with each other under the present administration or any administration that is advocating for fascist views, fascist ideals, or just, not respecting somebody's desire to live a high quality of life. I think symbols are important, as I stated before. I think, the American flag being flown in one's house is generally some sort of nod to white nationalism, or can be viewed in that way. So I think the Cascadia movement is in a place where people are looking for symbols or opportunities to take pride in their personhood, but take pride in their community and where they live. And I think that's what the Cascadia flag represents more than anything else, is a sense of pride in where you live and where you hang your hat, where you sleep at night. I think secondly, though, it is the Cascadia movement is centered around making sure our bioregion is a sustainable place to live for the future. So using whatever resources we have in this system to support a healthy ecosystem in 2040. I think that's like the banner year for a lot of organizations that are rooted in bioregional work, like the Puget Sound Regional Council has a 2040 plan. There's a variety of different bioregional orgs that are concerned about some of the ecological changes that could be pressed upon us in the next 15 years. So Vision 2050 is another group that is a circular economy group that is in consistently invested on, hey, how can we fix some of these, issues that we have that are not going to make this place as desirable, or how can we ensure this place continues to be well situated for, the expected population boom? Because right now we're a region of about 20 million people. There's projections that it could be double that in 2050. So I think the Cascadia movement as a whole is functionally invested in making sure we're the best livable possible climate haven region of 2050. I think that's where the movement is focused right now.
Yogi, you talk about developing symbols and culture as a way to promote the idea of Cascadia and bioregionalism more generally. Could you explain your thinking and what signs are you seeing that symbols and culture are taking root here?
Anytime you think of Seattle, you always think about the Space Needle almost, which is, the symbol of our city to a degree, but it's also a symbol of a specific progressive aim, the World's Fair and what all the successes meant there, and Seattle being kind of like a future destination, the Eiffel Tower being a symbol for Paris. But when we think about the United States, we think about really two things, the eagle and the flag, and what those symbols mean when people look at them used to mean freedom, right? A desire that anybody could, pull themselves up from their bootstraps and, have the white picket fence or whatever correlations they have with those things. I think symbols are really essential to connect people to ideas, which is ultimately what bioregionalism's goal is, what the Cascadia Bioregional movement is about. Having people think about the land differently, having people think about how they connect to that land differently, how they connect differently to the person around them. So the flag's essential in that. I think, the Douglas fir, the tree, and what the tree means. There's a lot of conversation about making Seattle more densely populated. And then there's a war between like the tree city people. So trees as a life bringer, as something that we can't completely control and comprehend is a key symbol of the movement.
All right, let's step back. And I think you were hinting at this a little bit, but if you could, there's kind of a playful side to this, right? Yes, there's kind of the serious discussion about independence and interdependence and borders and boundaries and culture. There's also a playful side to what we're exploring here, which is asking what if questions. So, imagine Cascadia is independent. If you could wave a magic wand, what would you want to see happen here?
We would have a universal basic income for everybody that lived in British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon. That was a basic amount that, we would have some mean amount for someone's housing costs and a mean amount for somebody's food costs. That would be calculated based on surveys that we took directly with the people and then gave that amount to each person. So people would at least, at the very minimum, be able to eat and live somewhere. If they wanted to live somewhere nicer, that's what their job would be for. That's what, working would make sense for. I think that's a circumstance that we have to plan around, because I think as technology improves, certain service jobs make less sense. I think a universal basic income would not eradicate fully, but I think it would resolve a large portion of our current mental health crisis.
Okay, so you've waved your magic wand, you've asked for a universal basic income, and you've been granted that wish. Paint a picture of the society that would exist in Cascadia if that were the case.
You would have people validated in the work that they did because they would do the work that they would most readily connect to. They wouldn't be working to survive. They would be working to thrive, as I would say. So now you would have, artists that could just create art, and it wouldn't be as important for them to make art based on some contract or something like that. You would still have, very ambitious people, right? And this is under still a capitalist model. I'm not so forward thinking that I'm replacing capitalism. I don't know what that world would look like. So you would still have people who would be motivated or so competitive to the point where they would, be trying to buy up this, buy up that. I'm not saying that person would no longer exist. I do think it would create a circumstance where people were just emotional beings and just empathetic, could take on roles where their wages wouldn't need to reflect the work that they did.
That was Yogi Uriah of the Cascadia Department of Bioregion. I got a lot from that conversation about the idea of bioregions. 5 takeaways. First, bioregions make natural sense, literally. Environmental features and ecosystems make more sense as boundaries than arbitrary lines on maps or human-built barriers. And bioregions do set culture. What we get to do, how we make a livelihood, the ways we play and socialize are shaped by our landscape and climate. 2, the West Coast includes 2 distinct bioregions. We may share an orientation to the Pacific, but the forests that stretch from Northern California through Oregon and Washington are distinct from the dry landscape that includes most of California. As we explore West Coast independence, how do we account for bioregional differences? Are we on the West Coast natural complements, or are we destined to be at odds? 3, natural order. If political boundaries are flawed and reflect a clumsy association of people with different values and cultures, perhaps it's incumbent on us in the West Coast bioregion or bioregions to start acting in accordance with our own culture or cultures, shaping laws to suit us and our values rather than conforming to rules and assertions of power we find unjust and out of keeping to how we orient to our land and one another. And isn't it the most natural thing in the world to suggest there's an interaction, even collaboration between different places, just as different species interact? 4, grassroots movements matter. And isn't the metaphor of grassroots just perfect for bioregionalism? People like Yogi Uriah and the Cascadia Department of Bioregion don't make headlines all of the time. They're quietly building community and advancing their intentions, nurturing a big idea until the timing is just right for it to grow. Bioregionalism germinated many years ago. Will it continue to grow slowly or shoot up out of the ground given just the right conditions? Either way, Pacific Time is going to highlight people like Yogi doing the work on the ground. He and people like him are shaping the West Coast just below the surface. 5, symbols matter. There's no fighting the human tendency to build collective identities and create symbols like flags and maps that are shorthand for things people share. Think about how encoded the American flag and the map of the U.S. are in our collective imaginations as Americans, and known to people all over the world. The Cascadia flag, its green, blue, and white fields backing a Douglas fir tree, is a beautiful example of an identity that has room to grow. And I'm asking, what if the West Coast started drawing its own map or maps? I mean, borders seem to be suddenly up for discussion in North America, so what if natural boundaries were part of the conversation? You can find some answers when you check out the Cascadia Department of Bioregion through the link in the show notes. Bioregionalism will be an important consideration as we continue to explore sovereignty and the future of the West Coast. If you're intrigued by what we've talked about today, make sure to follow Pacific Time on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Share it with your friends, family, and neighbors on the West Coast. I'm loving the conversations the podcast is creating and want to bring a wider variety of viewpoints into the discussion. Speaking of which, we're building a home for the Pacific Time community on Substack. For the foreseeable future, it's free to join for newsletters and other exclusive content. Look for @Pacific Time Podcast on Substack and let me know the topics you'd like us to address and the people you think would make great guests. This is Greg Amrofell. Thank you for being with me in Pacific Time, and keep asking, what if, about the future of the West Coast?